So with that, I think we'll dive right into our presentation for tonight. Tonight we are happy to have Blake Richard of the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife, and he'll be talking on why cameras are the most important tool in modern conservation. The title of his talk is Clicking for Conservation. This presentation will cover how Blake and others use or have used photographs in each of the unique and diverse experiences from DLSRs to mirrorless cameras to trail cameras and drones, each camera serving a purpose in managing wildlife and conserving them for stakeholders present and future. From grizzly bears caught eating bird eggs, goose eggs, and bird migrations tracked unimaginable distances to educational blogs, social media outreach, and invasive species. Cameras caught it all. Blake grew up in Park Falls, Wisconsin, not too far from home, got a degree in the natural resources from Northland College, and his first professional experience in the wildlife management was with the Wisconsin DNR in 2021, which blossomed into a new experience in Alaska with Ducks Unlimited in 2022. As a Ducks Unlimited intern, Blake helped monitor Dusky Canada geese as part of a Dusky Canada geese artificial nest island program. The following summer, he helped with a red knot survey in Controller Bay, Alaska. And that's kind of how we got to know Blake. Um, and before coming home and finishing summer with the Iron County Land and Water Conservation Department. After graduating from Northland, Blake went back to Alaska for another season of red knot field work before going even further north to used to be Prudhoe Bay. What's it called now?
Utqiagvik.
Utqiagvik, okay.
Yeah.
To work with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service on an eider project. Currently, he is in Moses Lake, Washington, and works as a natural resources specialist for the Washington Department of Fish and Wildlife. So, with that, Blake, so just in our birds and cameras kind of go hand in hand. At Horicon, we don't get many people that show up there without a camera of some sort. And it's definitely been an advantage to we get people coming in like, oh, I got a picture of this. What is it? We get people that come into birding through photography as well. So people out um, you know taking photos and like, oh, I'm taking pictures of birds, but I don't know what they're at. So it's kind of some people get into photography through birds and some people get into birds through photography, and you're using it as a conservation tool. So Blake, fill us in, take it away.
All right, will do. Thank you, Jeff. And thank you, everyone, for giving me your time tonight. I really appreciate it. And I hope that I can kind of tell you why I think cameras are the most important tool in modern conservation. I know there's a lot of tools out there, and why I think cameras are the most important ones. I hope I cover that in this presentation. But yes, as Jeff was saying, I grew up in Park Falls, Wisconsin, which Park Falls claims to be the rough grouse capital of the world, and whether it is or it isn't, I will leave up to somebody else. But it certainly had a huge influence and was certainly a big factor on my upbringing and childhood. Um, I'm definitely proud of where I come in northern Wisconsin, and I'm very thankful to the mentors that I had to introduce me to the outdoors and to hunting. And then, yes, as Jeff was saying, it's also where I landed my first real professional natural resources job with the Wisconsin DNR in the summer of 2021. And I did graduate from Northland College in 2024, so just last spring, in my natural resources, fisheries, and wildlife and / ecological restoration degree. And I also played men's basketball and baseball there. Athletics were a huge part of my upbringing, and they played a role in my last year of college with photography as well. And then the other important note about Northland College was I was a writing tutor in my last year as well. And that was very valuable to my personal growth, both in writing and photography. And the Horicon Marsh has always been close to me as I have spent many summers venturing about the Rock River, especially around the 4th of July. That was kind of the big holiday in parts of our family, and we go to our family cottage on the Rock River every year and just enjoy the fireworks. And I'd spend afternoons and mornings out chasing red-winged blackbirds and everything else that the marsh had to offer. So that's kind of how I am connected to the Horicon Marsh, and I feel very fortunate to have that place in my family and always being able to enjoy the holidays there. But my first real photography experience came in Alaska, as Jeff was saying. Um, it was part of the Ducks Unlimited Dusky Canada Goose Artificial Nest Island program. So I was hired as an intern by Ducks Unlimited to collaborate with the Forest Service and some of their employees on this program. And it was kind of just a really cool experience because photography is such such an important tool, and there's really no better place to experience your first experience with photography and kind of intermingling that with a natural resources field than Alaska because of the um, just the picturesque landscape that it has to offer. But one of the most important things I did with that position was to write blogs and have photographs associated with them. And despite this also being one of my favorite job duties, it was also one of the most important because it provided sort of an educational following for those DU employees that couldn't always make it to Cordova and see the Copper River Delta and the Dusky Canada Goose program that summer in person. The Pacific Northwest Ducks Unlimited regional office is in Seattle in Washington State, so it's still quite a ways away from Alaska. And just providing this short little blog, I wrote one probably about every week that really helped those folks back at DU follow what we were doing and how we were doing it, and then also kind of support reasons for donations from these donors that are potentially donating to Ducks Unlimited or the Dusky Canada Goose specifically. And then, of course, this was where the trail cameras came into play as well. Um, we put out the summer that I was there, we put out around 30, I believe, and they ultimately came back to be super important in our monitoring process. And not only were they important to share pictures per se on my blog or something, which the blog didn't always include educational things related to the Dusky Canada Goose. A lot of it was just about life in Alaska and how this was really my first experience up there. So it was cool to get to see those stories about somebody who hasn't been there before, and just how they react to seeing things for the first time and kind of experiencing that Alaska life for the very first time was part of the reason that blog was in place as well. But these cameras captured a lot of things, and not just the year that I was there in 2022, but also years before as well. I was able to go through some of the archives dating back to, I think, 2013 or 2012, even 10 years before that, the time that I was there. And they revealed some pretty crazy stuff. This is a picture from 2019, so 3 years before I was there. This goose eventually was able to escape, but you can see that it was just pretty much surrounded by bears, and um, bears are a fairly common predator of these Dusky Canada goose. And this nest site was actually one of the natural ones that they found that year, so not even on an island. And part of the reason for creating this Dusky Canada Goose artificial nest island program was to reduce the effects of mammalian predators, because mammalian predators were being they were increasing in numbers on the Copper River Delta due to an earthquake, which I'll talk about a little later. But the cameras would not allow us to do the monitoring that we could do without them. And here's just another image of a bear getting some goose eggs. Again, the female goose was able to flush before the bear got to her, but This is actually on an island, and unfortunately, the water wasn't quite as deep as we had hoped, and the bear was able to just wade right out to this island rather having to swim out there, which would potentially deter them from going out to this island and getting those goose eggs. Wolves were another common predator. This again was on an island that really had no water surrounding it at all. So the wolf was able to just walk right out there. Coyotes, another common one, but this again, a natural site, so not on an actual island, but coyotes were able to just walk right up there and weren't able to get the hen goose in all instances, but they were able to get almost certainly all those eggs that they had laid. And this one has surprised a lot of people. Even moose would deter or excuse me, flush geese from nests. This is another natural site, but moose potentially might not eat all those eggs, but they certainly cause an influence on the nesting goose by flushing her and making her having stressing her out, making her having to wait to come back to the nest and making those eggs cold. Um, it is certainly an indirect effect, but it can definitely impact nesting success of the geese on the delta. And moose aren't obviously a common predator of goose eggs, and I don't think I've ever seen a moose actually eat an egg, but they definitely can affect those indirectly. But the number one predator that we found of dusky Canada geese were bald eagles, and this is extremely problematic because not only has the delta seen an increase in mammalian predators, but they've seen an increase in bald eagles because the trees that never used to grow in the Copper River Delta um, provide perch points for these eagles, and they're more likely to seek out these islands because they're essentially a, um, a speck that is on these ponds that they can easily pick out and prey upon those geese and those eggs. So here's just another image of an eagle that landed, um, and all the goose could simply do is just watch. And this was one frame. These pictures that we have, or these cameras that we have set up, they're designed to take pictures every 20 seconds from essentially sunrise to sunset. So there was a lot of pictures to go through, but you could basically set up a time lapse and you could just play it through and pick out frames that were important. So this one, the eagle landed on the island to eat those eggs, but the geese could all they could do was just sit and watch. And eagles are mostly problematic because not only do they eat those eggs that the goose laid, but as you can see in this picture, there's a goose incubating her eggs right here. This is another natural site, so not an island. But a few frames later, this eagle just came and landed, and just there was a puff of feathers, and that was all that was left of that female goose that was incubating the eggs. So not only did the eagle get the eggs, it also got the female goose. But other than just looking at cool pictures of predators on goose nests, they play an important role because at each island, observers would try to determine if the nest had hatched or if it was destroyed or abandoned by a predator, and other things like how many goslings hatched. So we called it playing detective. So we'd go to these islands and try and count membranes, is what they're called. They're called egg membranes. In this case, there was five, and essentially it's just the inside of the eggshell where the gosling was, and membranes have been known to be successful gosling hatches. So in this case, there would have been five goslings that came off of this nest. And of the 31 cameras that we put out that year that I was there, we should have put them out a little earlier, but unfortunately there were some other things going on and timing didn't quite work out right. But almost every camera that we had put out had more eggs when the nest was initially found than when membranes were counted during monitoring. So for instance, this camera or this nest did not have a camera on it, but I counted these five membranes, and a camera could have potentially revealed 6 or 7 eggs when the observer first put that camera out. So it just really points out those possible flaws in human error in detecting these successful nests. And then the other interesting thing about the cameras was um, cameras that captured gosling pictures also saw more goslings leave the nest than the number of membranes counted during monitoring. So again, this one had 5 membranes, but a camera that could have been on this nest may have counted 7 or even 8. And it just really highlights those flaws in human error in playing detective, as we would call it. And you can run into some pretty weird situations, and it gets really hard to try and play detective, like we said. Um, this picture on the right was a goose egg that I had found in the water, actually, just outside the actual island. So when I was there, I was thinking, oh, maybe this was pushed out by an eagle, or it could have been even pushed out by the the goose when it left a nest for a nest break or something, just as her goslings were about to hatch. Because you can see here the gosling started to pip, is what we call it when they first stick their beak out and try and break that eggshell. But when it went in the water, it just drowned. So this was a fairly obviously unsuccessful hatch for this egg specifically, but you come over here to this picture on the left, and you could potentially say that that's a membrane, or that it hatched and just got shredded by even a raven or something that landed on the nest and was just picking at it after the fact that these goslings hatched. But there's just no way to really tell whether that was a membrane that was successful and just deteriorated in the conditions, or whether it was actually predated on by an eagle or a bear or something that just shredded it while the gosling was still inside. So having a camera out there would have just been beneficial to actually seeing the actual outcome of that nest. Whereas when we're out there without a camera, you get some pretty subjective data at that point. And of course, there's always success stories as well. Not all the camera footage is bad. Um, this was a photo from the year before I was there. Um, and again, this photo reveals that there's 5 goslings that successfully hatched from this nest. But if the monitor only saw 4 membranes or 3 membranes, that could potentially skew data. And this is not a novel thing either. Using cameras for research is no novelty. Waterfowl and cameras have been intertwined in management and research for a very long time. There's an endless amount of research out there about using cameras for nest success or even nest searching, brood surveys, things like that. And it's not just birds either. There's countless studies on mammals, just like this one in Alaska on walrus. Um, these scientists were able to survey walrus populations because of declining sea ice, actually. So these walrus would line up along barrier islands in Alaska instead of resting out on the sea ice, which they normally do. And that allowed these scientists to fly unmanned aerial vehicles, or UAVs, which are essentially drones, and they could fly over these barrier islands and count each walrus and use that as a population estimate rather than having to um, go out into the actual Arctic Ocean and Chukchi Sea to try and count walrus on floating icebergs. And another cool thing about this study was they attached satellite transmitters to some of the walrus as well, and they were able to detect when the majority of the walrus population would be out of the water to best time those UAV flights. Here's another cool one out of the western US with some feral horses. A lot about what I'm going to talk about next is related to mirrorless and telephoto lens cameras. But in this case, these researchers took pictures of horses out of helicopters, and they were able to use it essentially as a mark recapture study, um, and count individuals by their unique spot patterns. And they found that their techniques could potentially be used for other mammal populations that have individual markings, just like these wolverines. So wolverines on their kind of their chest patch, they have and a unique pattern to that individual. And not only did this group of scientists take pictures of those patterns on wolverines, but they also integrated it with a hair snag approach, So when these wolverines would come up to this bait station and reach up for a piece of bait that was dangling here, these little hooks would catch DNA analysis of their hair. So essentially, they could pair that DNA with a picture, and of the 18 individuals that this study captured over 2 years, there was a 100% match between using photographs and those DNA samples, which is very important because DNA analysis today is very expensive. And if you can substitute that with just taking a picture of these individually marked wolverines or other mammals, birds, anything, it can reduce a lot of that cost. This one was related to elk in Arizona. They used video surveillance to better understand elk movement under highway underpasses. And these underpasses were only about 250 meters apart. And they found that of the around 3,700 elk that they were able to capture on video, the majority of them preferred the east underpass because of its natural earthen sides and more open areas for them to cross. So the one on the west had concrete sides, and there was a few more obstructions in the middle that they could try and cross. But most of them preferred that east underpass. And another cool thing that they were able to find was detection rates in when the elk would actually cross, depending on traffic, whether there was a lot of traffic or no traffic, or when they would be hesitant to cross because of those obstructions in the underpass, or when there was traffic present. And the final cool one that I was able to find that I think is astounding is this group of researchers forced their trail cameras to take infrared pictures even during the day. And what that did was they were able to identify individual melanistic leopards. Melanistic just means that they are all black, essentially. And this top left picture, the scientists would not have been able to mark that individual if they had used infrared, just like this bottom right picture. So the infrared just reveals those unique spot patterns that are um, unique to that individual. So then scientists can estimate population densities and other things like that based on that individual. But back to the Copper River Delta, another cool thing about cameras was they last a long time. Pictures and cameras last a long time. They are pretty much forever. Even these ones that were taken in 1959 of the Copper River Delta. So like I was saying before, there was an earthquake in 1964 that accelerated many successional changes on the delta and provided those perch points and woody areas for mammalian predators and those bald eagles to reside. So this picture in the top right was taken in 1959, and flash forward to 2022 when I was there, the bottom right picture was taken in roughly the same location. And you can see there's a line of alders pretty much surrounding this muskeg meadow, and there's a pond just to the right of this picture, but you can't see it. There's a line of alders surrounding it, and there's also a line of spruce trees surrounding it. So that's what provided that increase in mammalian predators and pretty much prompted the Dusky Canada Goose Artificial Nest Island program. Again, here's just another picture, this one from the air and taken a year before that 1959 one. But if you look closely in this bottom right corner, you'll see that the Copper River Delta is just this maze of sloughs and ponds and a complex of water and just everything you can imagine for nesting waterfowl and water birds. But after that earthquake in 1964, it really dried things out and produced these lines of trees and willows and alders and just stuff that is more suited for mammalian predator habitat. So it really decreased that Dusky Canada goose nesting success. The other cool thing that I was able to do in 2022, which I could also do in 2023 and 2024, was go out on this red knot abundance and prey availability survey in Controller Bay, Alaska, which is just east of the Copper River Delta. And I won't get too much into this because I know there was already a talk on it, and the main reason that I wanted to mention it was just to highlight the fact that using cameras we were able to get more data. Part of that was working out some of the kinks from the pilot year in 2022, but a lot of it was also in 2022 we would use spotting scopes and try and essentially read the bird's leg flags in live time, which was extremely difficult when it's always windy pretty much, it's always raining pretty much, and these birds, they don't sit still. Even when they're feeding, they kind of move with the tide line. So they're constantly moving, and it's just hard to keep a spotting scope on that leg flag while you're trying to read it. And there's birds crossing in front of it, and just there's so many variables that make it very tricky. Whereas trying to take pictures of them, we found that there was much more success. And again, that was partly just working out some of the kinks of that first pilot year in 2022. But a lot of it was also getting those still images that we could look back on later and um, get a readable leg flag that way rather than using a spotting scope in live time. And another important thing to note is this top right picture. This band is at least 10 years old. I forget what the return of it was on the band certificate, but there's it would have almost been impossible to get a read on this, even if the bird was standing completely still with a spotting scope, because that ink that the flag had on the alphanumerics was just completely gone. The only way that you could see this, even in the photograph, was to zoom in really close and get a really good view of that. And it was almost just shadowed, like there was hardly any ink left, and you could just barely make out what it said. Um, red knots that are tagged in Mexico, they get a yellow band, and a yellow band with black ink. But the black ink again wears off fairly well, and all you're left with is just a yellow flag, so you know it's from Mexico, but you can't get a number read to identify that individual. So using cameras really helped hone in on getting those specific numbers and letters for those for that important data. And then after that in 2023, so 2022, I did the Dusky Canada Goose internship while going out on this red knot survey. And then 2023, I was back in Controller Bay doing this red knot survey before coming back to Wisconsin with the Iron County Land and Water Conservation Department, which is based out of Hurley, Wisconsin, right on the UP border. But most of what we did there was focus on invasive species, a lot of aquatic invasive species due to the high density of lakes in that area. Um, and one of the most important things we did, me and my coworkers, was create an Instagram page for the department. This was just an example of a post that we put together about one of the days we went out and checked our loon platform, and we actually had a job shadow this day, so we had some pictures of our job shadowee with us, and um, it was just a cool thing to kind of share throughout the summer what we did, for those who followed our page, and also try to provide that outreach that is so important in conservation today. Here's another thing not related to invasive species, but one of the cooler things that we did that summer was put together a native planting on some private land, and just share that with those people that follow our page. Was just a really cool experience, and we thought that it would be important for promoting that outreach that we really need for the department. And again, this is not a novel thing. Um, Outreach and social media is very important these days, and this is not just related to the Iron County Land and Water Conservation Department. Citizen science is a huge thing today. You talk about eBird, things like that. It really provides an important data set, not only for researchers, but just for the public in general to look at and kind of have a better understanding of what's going on, related to natural resources and wildlife and just everything that's related to nature in general. But this study looked at caracal sightings, which is like a kind of like a bobcat. There's this urban caracal project in South Africa that put together a Facebook and Instagram page in 2021 and 2022. And as you can see on this new followers graph on the left, number of new followers on Facebook increased, number of followers on Instagram increased, and so did their sightings for their urban caracal project that were called in directly to their website by citizens in this study area. So providing that extra outreach really allowed these scientists to collect more data and educate more people on what they're doing and how they're doing it. And one cool thing to look at also with this study was the demographics of each platform. And we at Iron County, when I was there, we thought that a new Instagram page would be beneficial because of this demographic shift to younger people. Facebook, they already had a pretty good outreach at the Iron County Land and Water Conservation Department. They had a good page that's been up for a few years and a good number of followers. But we really thought they were lacking in the Instagram and younger generation category. So that's why I put the Instagram page together. And then a lot of the followers that we gained were younger people. So we really think that that helped with the department's outreach and potentially recruiting new people to hire in the future. And of course, it wouldn't be Iron County without talking about loons. Mercer, Wisconsin, which is quite near Hurley. I drive through it every day on the way to work, is the loon capital of the world. And though this picture wasn't taken on a working day related closely to loons, it was more related to invasive species, but you can see the impacts of invasive species on loons and other things as you're out there working. But one of the cool things that I had not really thought about with loons and loon nesting was the black fly problem that they often face in their peak nesting periods. So one of the days we went out and collected a trail camera that was on a loon platform for a thing called Loon Watch. And after we collected that, it had been a pretty bad year for those black flies. And we still saw some loon chicks and they were able to successfully hatch some. But even growing up in northern Wisconsin and seeing loons all the time and even occasionally coming across a loon nest, it never really crossed my mind just how bad the black flies could be on a loon, because I would I would be out in the water and black flies would be present, but it's not like I would be covered in them just like this loon was. And that's another important thing about photographs is they can really help you see things that you couldn't see before, and they can help you see things from a different perspective, because after seeing this photograph, um, I just got a much better sense of what loons could potentially go through as they're nesting. And I mean, this thing is just covered in black flies. I can't even imagine what this would be like trying to incubate an egg while it's while the sun's beating down and there's black flies in your eyeballs basically the whole day. And the only way you can get a break is to leave your nest and go in the water. And that's why you can sometimes see that relationship between black flies and loons based on the number of black flies in successful loon hatches. So just another cool thing that cameras can provide is just that emotional aspect, and putting this on Instagram or something. I mean, people would see this and they could potentially get emotional, and that could make them want to care about something such as these loons. And then after that summer of 2023, I went back to school. Spring, I went back up to Controller Bay for the final year of the Red Knot survey. And then after that, I was an eider intern with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in Utqiagvik, Alaska, which is also known as Barrow, Alaska. It's the northernmost city in the United States. And again, this was a lot of waterfowl monitoring with cameras, and I would take my camera out there with me every day. But we put up a lot of trail cameras on these eider nests, even though we didn't find many of them. We put out a trail camera on just about every one. But one of the things that was different with this experience compared to the Copper River Delta was the way that the camera would stick out, because the tundra is very flat and you can see for miles upon miles. And as you're looking at a nest, because the hen eider is blended in so well, it's extremely hard to see. But once you put a camera there, there's this 2-foot tripod sitting up there with a camera on it that a predator could pick out from who knows how far away. And that's been a common thing in waterfowl research is, do these cameras that are put out there do they have an effect on predators picking them out? And even with the Dusky Canada Goose Islands, there's been some talk that eagles can pick out those islands better than anything. So if we got rid of the islands, maybe the eagles won't be able to pick them out as well, but then you have mammalian predators going after them more. So it's just cameras help reveal so much that we couldn't potentially see ourselves, but there's also some um, caution around it because of those effects that putting a man-made thing out there in front of a goose nest might have an effect on them as well. And I won't get too much more into this eider intern position, but one of the things that I do like to share is this picture because it really shows you just how wide open the tundra was. And this caribou skull that I found, I don't remember exactly how far away I was when I saw it, but just having that flat, wide open landscape, it makes you pick up on things that you wouldn't normally see when there's vegetation around or when there's alders covering a nest, like there would potentially be on the Copper River Delta. Um, but this is just the one picture that I always like to share because of that knowledge and just how wide open it was. And another cool thing about the cameras on the eider nest was a lot of times the eiders would nest almost in a symbiotic relationship with Pomeranian Jaegers. So Jaegers are like a small bird of prey that they defend their territory, their nesting territory very aggressively. So by the eiders nesting in those territories of the Pomeranian Jaegers, they would fend off potential predators of the eider nest. And the eiders seem to have figured that out because they would nest almost within the 250-yard radius or whatever it was of the Jaeger nest. And they would have that added protection of Jaegers scaring off Arctic foxes and other predators from their nesting areas. But then this too, the eiders would leave a nest, and Jaegers wouldn't hesitate to prey on their eggs either. So it's kind of a catch-22. But when I was there, it seemed as though the eiders definitely took to it and benefited from it as well. And then currently, I'm a natural resources specialist with the Columbia Basin Wildlife Area, which is in Moses Lake, Washington. And I started this position on July 23rd, 2024, right after the position in Alaska. And this is just kind of an all around good experience for me. I get a lot of experience doing trade work and working with my hands. And also, just this past week, we released pheasants for the Eastern Washington Pheasant Enhancement Program. So pheasant habitat has declined significantly with agriculture and things like that in Eastern Washington. So releasing pheasants is just part of supplementing that for hunting populations. And this photo that I took of my coworker releasing pheasants out of a crate was also included on the highlight report, is what we call it for WDFW. They put that together, I think, twice a month, and that's just kind of like another public outreach thing. But I don't quite get as much hands-on, like scientific, technical work because there's other people in the office that focus on that stuff. But I get a lot of other hands-on work doing that trade work and other valuable things for my career. And right now, I just started picking up these camera pictures that they had put out last spring, capturing images of our waterfowl project areas. And essentially what I'm doing with these pictures is counting every duck from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. from late March to early May. So there's a lot of ducks that you got to count. But the reason for doing this is we can compare camera images and counts from area that we manage specifically for waterfowl feed and we intensely manage it versus another area that's not as intensely managed and potentially might not see as much feed for waterfowl. So you can see the benefits of doing all this habitat manipulation and working towards invasive species goals and other things like that to increase waterfowl production just by putting cameras out and counting ducks. And this is a very tedious process because the cameras, like I said, they take pictures every hour from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. every day for about a month and a half. So the three areas that I've been through now, the total duck counts have been around 13,000, 7,000, and I think 16,000. So it's just a very long process that takes a lot of time, but it's essentially as it sounds. I would go each picture. This one was taken at 11 a.m. on March 27th. And I'd count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way up to however many ducks were in our 1 acre image. And a lot of times our 1 acre image would be cut off. So that in this case, our cutoff for about a 1 acre area is this island up here. And that can get tricky too because there's a lot of subjectivity. You try and line up your computer screen with where this island precisely starts, but with dropping water levels and things like that, it makes it super complicated to try and exactly pinpoint where that 1 acre area size is every single time, especially with so many pictures. So it's just another it's a good thing because we have cameras to monitor, but it's also like, okay, there's a lot of subjectivity here still. So can we make it better, or are there other ways that we could improve our counts? And of course, with taking pictures, there's always some that don't work out or are potentially not not going to be included in the data set because of the time is wrong or something like this one. The pictures are scheduled to take a picture every hour, but this one was taken, as you can see, at 11:31 and 44 seconds because this plane flew over and scared these ducks away, and that's all it takes to trigger that camera, even though we had it set up for on the hour. So this is another reason why cameras could be potentially not work out is because since this one was taken at 11:31 and 44 seconds, it can't necessarily be included in the data set, and you just have to enter it as a zero, and then put in the notes that there's a timestamp error because of this plane that flew over and flushed these birds. And you get all kinds of things in front of these cameras. I mean, deer can walk in front of them. Thankfully, this one was at 5:45, so it was after that 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. cutoff, but you get owls flying in front of the camera at night, and then a lot of times there's also red-winged blackbirds and tree swallows that will just hover right in front of the camera, and you'll just get like a really close-up view of a tree swallow or something, and that'll even if the picture is taken on the hour, you won't be able to see half the image because the tree swallow takes up this center part where most of the ducks are anyway, so you just kind of have to make a note of that and do the best you can. And then another important thing to note in this picture, there's a lot of tall emergent vegetation that ducks can hide behind. So it's just another subjective thing that could potentially throw off data, even though cameras are the best monitoring tool that we have right now. And they did try drones the spring before I got here, so this past spring, and they found that it could potentially work, but the logistics of flying a drone every hour from 8 a.m. to 5 p.m. for a month and a half at um, 8 project sites is just almost impossible. And even after taking this test image, although it might be easier to count some of these ducks in the middle portion, once you get up to where the banks kind of get muddier and the snow kind of meets these other tall emergent vegetation patches, there's just there's still so much subjectivity in there, and you don't know whether it's a plant or whether it's a duck or if you should count it or not, or there's just endless complications, but cameras are still the best tool that we have to date. And although we haven't had much success with drones in our waterfowl counts, there has been some success with drone surveys in an apartment. This first one that I'll share is not related to wildlife at all, but related to topography and flooding. They were able to fly drones that were equipped with cameras to collect information on current habitat conditions after water flows were above average last spring in the Pashastin drainage, which is in Western Washington. And though the results haven't yielded as much as they would have liked, and I don't know exactly how much they or what they wanted to find, they were still able to find some important information on habitat conditions based on GIS and even thermal imaging from those drones. Um, but again, this is a relatively new technology, and even for monitoring populations or topography, it can be challenging, and just getting drones out there and kind of seeing what they're capable of is super important. Here's another one with pygmy rabbits, which are critically endangered in the Columbia Basin. But drones could potentially be the answer to more accurate population monitoring. And starting this December, flights will test sensor capabilities and effectiveness in detecting those populations in snowy conditions. So again, it's just kind of like a test flight, but it might be the answer to helping these pygmy rabbits kind of reach a viable population. And drones, even though they haven't been successful for our waterfowl counts, they are potentially successful for larger bodied waterfowl like swans and geese. Um, Again, in Western Washington, drones are going to be deployed to collect data on population size as well as age class. And then those counts from drones are going to be compared to ground counts, which we already know are fairly successful for swans and geese. And just to compare those two is, again, super valuable because drones are a new technology. And I will say, as important and cool and just scientifically valuable as cameras are, unfortunately, you can't just spit facts, you have to inspire. This was a line that my professor told me one of my last classes at Northland College. Um, and as important as they are for those scientific breakthroughs, it's just more critical to inspire rather than just spitting those facts. And photographs are really the most inspiring thing that I know. And currently, we face a problem with inspiration. Um, we could always certainly use a little more inspiration. And thankfully, we are starting to realize that there is a somewhat of a decline in hunter participation, even though waterfowl specifically populations have been shown to be increasing for the last 40 years relatively steadily. There's been a severe decline in hunter participation, not only in waterfowl hunting, but in deer hunting and hunter participation in general. And ultimately, conservation funding, a lot of it comes from hunters and those people that spend money on ammunition and guns and things to go hunting that they use to go hunting. A lot of that conservation funding comes from hunters. So it's super, super important to get that participation back up. And thankfully, the North American Waterfowl Management Plan Committee realized this, and in 2012, they um, they deferred their plan from previous goals with a revolutionary and visionary articulation of a third goal that they stated was to expand the numbers of waterfowl hunters and other conservationists and citizens who enjoy actively supporting waterfowl and wetlands conservation. Um, so again, this is super important because hunters basically drive, in the United States anyway, they basically drive conservation funding through non-government organizations and government organizations to conserve those landscapes that hunters care about. And the next question is for me, how do I inspire? And the easy answer is I inspire with photographs, of course, because there's nothing else that I find more inspiring. But one of the most important, one of the most inspiring photographs that I think is out there today is just pictures of waterfowl hunting. And specifically for me, it's dogs that I've hunted with birds in their mouth that provide those memories for me. And I think that these types of photographs are my favorite to capture because they ultimately really get somebody to believe in something again. And instead of just hearing about those same old scientific facts all day long about how many ducks were counted at this project site because we did all this habitat manipulation, or how many predators got to Dusky Canada Goose Islands this summer, or how many red knots came from where. And although that stuff is very cool, um, stories and creativity are what change values. And wildlife management and conservation is ultimately an expression of societal values. So when you get somebody to believe in something again, like conservation, that's where conservation will live on forever. And these valuable stories will allow me to relive memories I want to make more of. And ultimately, that's going to make conservation live on forever. And I want to finish with this quote by Aldo Leopold that goes, "The camera industry is one of the few innocuous parasites on wild nature." And although this quote is very important to me and it highlights well why I'm so passionate about photography, um, it could very well be that cameras are not only not harmful to wild nature, they may ultimately be our only hope. And that's why cameras are the most important tool in modern conservation. And with that, I would like to thank you all again for joining me. I will take any questions at this time if you have them. And I also would like to share my email and websites and phone number if you have any questions related to this presentation or anything in general after the fact as well.
Thanks, Blake. Great presentation. We do have a couple of questions
All
in
right.
the chat. Bum, bum, bum. So Margaret wants to know, Blake, what do you do with the data such as how many Canada geese hatch per year?
Great question. Essentially, all that data is compiled into an annual report, which has been happening basically since the Dusky Canada Goose program was initiated, I think, in 1984. So what the data has previously showed is that those islands are roughly 2 times as successful as natural sites. And although we didn't monitor natural sites as intensely when I was there, they have in the past. And compiling that data into annual reports and ultimately a giant database with all that data just helps improve numbers and management decisions on how many islands should we have, things like that. Because we know that islands are more successful than those natural sites, having cameras out there would really help with using that data and providing management decisions in the future. So yeah, the easy answer to that question is all that data is compiled into the annual report and ultimately the Dusky Canada Goose Island database as a whole.
Second question, kind of related. Are you comparing numbers with the previous years on the duck counts?
Yes, so a lot of that is mostly related to comparing the habitat manipulated area versus the non-habitat manipulated area, but we do compare across years as well. Unfortunately, the years only go back to 2018, I want to say. So there's not a whole lot of data there, but we certainly do compare across years, yes.
Then Amy has a question. First, said excellent presentation. Do you feel it's still of value to buy a duck stamp?
Absolutely. I think duck stamps are possibly the most important conservation success story that there has been. I always buy two every year, try to buy two every year. Duck stamps are critical for waterfowl conservation and wetland conservation in general.
Yes, I'll add to that. That's probably the easiest and simplest thing you can do for all conservation is to buy that duck stamp.
Yes, and I would like to add that the federal duck stamp was created and put into law during the Great Depression when essentially there was no money and hunters lobbied Congress to pass a bill saying they want to pay more money to go hunting. So that's how important it is, and that's how successful it has been.
And you don't have to be a hunter to buy a duck stamp either. You can buy it,
Yes.
and Blake, I'm sure you when you buy two, I'm sure you're probably putting one away unsigned so you can be a millionaire and retire when you're 55. I one of my most prized possessions is my father's duck stamp. He has and he has the first 2 years the duck stamp. I think it was 1934 was the first one, 33 or 34. So I have my father
Yeah,
duck stamps from those years. Um,
very cool. Yeah, definitely get your duck stamp every year. They're super valuable.
yeah. Um, Lori has a, do you have a favorite duck to hunt or photograph there in Washington?
In Washington specifically, I don't know if I have a favorite yet. I will say my all-time favorite is the wood duck, just from growing up in northern Wisconsin. Those were kind of my MO as I was hunting and taking pictures, and they're just so beautiful. It's hard to beat a wood duck. Ringnecks are close second just because of the amount of time I spent capturing them. And I think in Washington here, I would have to just go with probably an American widgeon just because they're so common. And I didn't see a lot of those growing up in northern Wisconsin. So it's kind of cool to see the numbers that we do here.
Wood duck, a wonderful choice.
Yes.
There in my garage, there is a car with it has a license plate that says wood duck.
Uh,
So, there was another, Lori says, what the worst predator on the Dusky Goose? You had mentioned eagles, bears,
yep.
what?
Eagles are definitely the worst. They just have such good eyesight. They can pick out adults and goslings, so they essentially provide predation opportunities to the goose throughout their nesting period and even their brood rearing period. So you see them across all stages of um, a waterfowl life cycle, essentially. Whereas a bear or other mammalian predators, you only see kind of coming to the nest or opportunistically getting those eggs. Eagles, you're going to see pretty much year round on those predating on those dusky Canada goose.
Is that Copper River area, does that freeze over in the winter time or is that tidal based
You'll
to keep it open?
you'll get the ponds where the islands are; those will freeze over, but the river itself doesn't necessarily freeze over. And then it borders right up against the Gulf of Alaska, so that won't freeze over.
Janet.
Oh, let's see. Janet says, beautiful and concerning photos, Blake. You're doing wonderful work. Presentation's very interesting. Thank you. Margaret, thank you for the information and your experience perspective. Great presentation. Janelle Larson says, great presentation, Blake. I didn't know about the impacts of black flies on loons. Learn something new every day. That is very interesting. I know in the reintroduction of the whooping cranes, that has been a problem, and not the black flies that bother humans. It's a species of black fly, a smaller species that is just more of an avian predator.
Uh,
Uh, and there were certain soil types that avian black fly liked. It had sandy soil, so like when they did the initial reintroduction in the CETA area, that was a problem. And then they did a little bit of study, and they found that it was not that species of black fly was not in areas that had more muckier or clay soils. So
uh,
why the reintroduction effort was shifted more towards White River Marsh, Horicon, and kind of spread out a little bit more. So,
yeah, cool. Very interesting.
yeah, just when you think you have everything all figured out, some things as insect could really throw a
Yeah,
wrench in the whole
yeah,
production process. Um, Also throw a plug in there. I know you said you had worked with or injured with Ducks Unlimited, been a member for years and years and years. You know, those funds. There was a big initiative at Horicon to help out with some restoration work and maintaining some control structures and riprap and some of those dikes that were put in, 60, 70 years ago
yeah, yeah,
to help that out. And those type of organizations and your duck stamp, yes, they're kind of geared towards waterfowl, but those shorebirds, that muskrat, American bittern, they don't know that was funded by
yeah,
Ducks Unlimited, and that wetlands are just so vital, just for biodiversity and and the like. So that's kind of a heart, things with the wetlands squishy places, I always call them.
Yeah,
And
yeah,
the the riverine plain forest where all those warblers come through in the springtime. It's so important to maintain those.
yeah, for sure. Definitely agree.
You want to read that?
Um, Leslie said, thanks, very informative. And then Lori Larson says, you have really have had a lot of amazing experiences and in rare, beautiful places. Thank you for sharing so much information with us. Plan to check out your photography as many beautiful photos. Thank you for the presentation to us. Yeah, that was really good.
Yes, well, it's certainly been a pleasure. So thank you guys.
One thing that you did point out that was kind of an eye opener for me and my generation and connecting to you and your generation is the Instagram following.
Yeah, yeah,
And it skewers a much younger audience, which we're always trying to connect to a younger audience. You think of birders and bird watchers and our club in our area, diversity is someone without gray hair, So it's always like, or a lot of folks and volunteers are kind of aging out, so we need to really recruit younger generations and younger folks uh,
yeah,
and how how your generation communicates is way different than how my generation, communicated at that age. So it's
yeah, absolutely. And I mean, it's even probably changing faster than it has been. There's probably a new social media platform that I don't even have or know about that younger kids are using today. And just having that as another outreach outlet is super important.
I know spots, especially national parks, have used, the Instagram phenomenon. Glacier National Park, has just grown exponentially uh, over the last 10 years or so.
Yeah,
Just by the photographs of the beautiful photographs that people gather there and make there has really put them on the map. So
yeah, for sure.
Any more questions, comments? Feel free to unmute and ask it if you don't want to type something in the chat box. All right, well,
okay.
say goodbye.
Well, Blake, have a safe and productive and enjoyable travels.
Yes,
Um,
yes, thank you. I will.
I'm kind of jealous. You do some amazing things there.
Yeah, I'm certainly looking forward to it.
All right.
So with that, our next meeting will be December 12th. It'll be a week earlier than normal. It'll be Vortex Optics, and that'll be an in-person meeting. I don't know if we're going to have any type of Zoom with that at all. That'll
No.
be too hard to do. But so um, stay tuned. Newsletter and social media. We'll be in contact.
All right. Goodbye, everybody. Thanks, Blake.
Yes, thank you. Have a good night.
You too. Have a good trip. Bye-bye.
Bye.